button up this gentleman's blazer.
I like his son's hair.
What is that some cricket club?
Friends, welcome. Welcome to this talk in the Mansfield series. And my name is Helena Kennedy and I'm the principal here at Mansfield College. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Stanley Johnson to you. Stanley Johnson, of course, is an Oxford man in that he was educated at Exeter and was a great classicist. And he won a Harkness Fellowship to the United States. And from thence, his life has taken many different turns. He was a Conservative member of the European Parliament. He was the Vice Chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Consumer Protection. He worked for the European Commission. He was the head of the prevention of pollution there. He's advised on the environment to different organisations. He was also, in fact, on the staff at one time of the World Bank and the International Planned Parenthood Federation. He didn't plan his own parenthood with great success in that he's got 6 children. I won't mention that again. But we'll talk about parenthood later. Stanley has been, as I said, an advisor to many different organisations and the director of different organisations. But the thing that he is really recognised for and celebrated for is his incredible work on the environment. He is a trustee of Earthwatch Institute and Plant Life International, an environmental advisor to Jupiter Asset Management, trustee of the Gorilla Organisation, ambassador for the United Nations Convention on Migratory Species, and any number of other things. He's written many different books on environmental issues, including The Politics of the Environment, The Earth Summit, and Environmental Policy of the European Communities. He's written novels, many novels. In fact, one of them I've just been gifted tonight, which you have to get, which is Compromat, which is his latest book on Brexit and how it's really, was made to happen by the Russians. Of course, fictional, but it's looking more true by the day. Anyway, but one of his novels, The Commissioner, was made into a film, an interesting film with John Hurt, a wonderful actor. In 1984, he was awarded the Greenpeace Prize for Outstanding Services to the Environment. And the same year, RSPCA gave him the Richard Martin Award for Services to Animal Welfare. In 1962, he won the Newdigate Prize for Poetry. He's a man of many, many parts, many talents. In 2012, he was awarded the World Wildlife Fund Silver Medal. 2015, he received the RSPB's Medal for Services to Nature Conservation. And he is one of the World Wildlife Foundation's Fund's leaders of the Living Planet Award. Stanley, as I've mentioned, has a number of different children, one of whom is well known to us all, Boris, who is our Foreign Secretary, but also the father of Rachel, a great journalist, of Leo, a Conservative politician and senior minister, and Joe, who is, and Leo, who is himself a conservationist and environmentalist. And his 2 other children, Julia and Maximilian, their mother's here, and she's a great woman who holds Stanley to account better, as the rest of us try to do Stanley, but with no success. Stanley is a unique and one and only person, and I feel very proud that he accepted my invitation to come here tonight. And he's just been swimming with seals and dolphins in some island between Australia and New Zealand. We're lucky to have got you here alive. Welcome, Stanley.
Thank you very, very much. Lovely. Thank you. Well, I feel tremendously honoured to be here and wonderful to be invited by Helena Kennedy, who, if I were to say what Helena does, there wouldn't be any time left at all for my talk, which would be quite a good thing, really. Anyway, what I'm going to do is say a bit more about how I became an environmentalist, because that was the topic which Helena asked me to talk to. And then I'm going to show some pictures. Some pictures about some major international achievements. I have been very much involved with the United Nations Environment Programme. Then I'm going to show some pictures about My own particular passion is a book I've written called Where the Wild Things Were. And finally, just to throw in some pictures from a trip I just finished in Australia a few days ago, just for fun. So, why am I an environmentalist? It is an accident of birth in many ways. Well, of upbringing. I was brought up on a farm on Exmoor. And, you know, this is such a beautiful place that you, as it were, imbibe a sense of nature. I'm sure Wordsworth got it in the Lake District. Wordsworth was down in the West Country, of course, as well, Wordsworth and Coleridge. So Wordsworth would have understood what I meant had he been living at this hour, as someone said, a poet. Wordsworth, thou should be living at this hour, or Milton, thou should be living at this hour. Anyway, I was lucky enough to be brought up on a sheep farm on Exmoor. Sir Walter de Stapleton, who founded Exeter College, Oxford, in 1343, and I would point out that we are, you know, we Exeter is quite an old college. 1343 is a perfectly respectable age, about the time people were thinking about founding Harvard and things like that. He decided he would set up a fellowship or a scholarship for sons of farmers who had sheep farm within 30 miles or 40 miles of Exeter. And it turned out I was the only possible candidate for that particular award. And so I was lucky enough to come to Exeter College, Oxford. When you're in Oxford, you don't really always have to say Exeter College, Oxford, because people know what you mean. But in real life nowadays, I can tell you, you say I was in Exeter, they think you mean a place down in the West Country. If you say I was at Worcester, I'm not sure what they think. I think they probably think Worcester still means Worcester College, Oxford. Anyway, but I was lucky, and I've got to say that, leaving aside, as it were, the fact I grew up on the farm, the Aufklärung, you know, the illumination came to me one day about the environment. It must have been about I came up in October 1959. I would think it was probably the fall term of 1960. I was sitting in the junior common room, and I was reading a report of something called the Pugwash conferences. Now, the Pugwash is a little village. Is it in Nova Scotia?
Somewhere like that.
Somewhere like that, where some very, very bright people, you know, people with university educations, for example, would go and think and write and talk. And I remember sitting in the chair in the JCR, reading a report from the Pugwash Conference of 1960, which pointed out that the world's population of 2 billion had already grown to 4 billion and was likely to grow to 9.5 billion by the year 2050, and something surely had to be done about it. And that was absolutely in my mind at that moment. Now, I didn't immediately do anything about it because, as Helen has said, I went off to America to do something called creative writing. In those days, creative writing was quite a new invention. The Americans thought, what's writing? Let's call it creative writing. They set up some writers' workshops, and one was at Stanley, run by Wallace Stegner, and one was at Iowa City, Iowa, in the State University of Iowa, run by a brilliant American called Paul Engel. And the Harkness, wonderful, I think it's still going, the Harkness fellowships. Don't ignore the chances of going to America on a Harkness. They give you about $4,000 a month. They give you a car. The only requirement you had was to make sure you travel for 4 months around any different part of America you could conceivably imagine. And in those days, it was all right. Boris by then was born, but there wasn't this rule that you had to have a baby strapped in a seat. So he was out 1 week old, and we simply put him in his carry-cot at the back of the car and travelled around America. So that was a slight diversion from, as it were, my career as an environmentalist, but I started off as a creative writer, writing poetry. That was one of the reasons I got the Harkness Fellowship, which I'm pretty sure it was the reason anyway. I'd written rather a longish poem. It was 90 98 lines of Chaucerian rhyme royal, A, B, A, B, C, C, D, for the technical experts among you. Now, there was a little bit of a diversion, but quite soon it became clear to me that you couldn't, as it were, feed what looked already like it was going to be a growing family, writing occasional poems. It just wasn't on. I did write a few poems. I could probably find them if I were to dig around. But in practice, I thought I'd better become an economist. These are the things which happen. So I wrote to the Harkness Fellowship. It was Amelia V. and Edward S. Harkness, as I recall. I think they're still going strong in New York now. I mean, there was one that I said, would you mind, I know you sent me to Iowa to do creative writing, but would you mind if I quickly changed and went to Columbia to do economics? And they said, oh, all right, if you must. But what are you going to do about the car? They said to me. You've got a car. Well, I said, well, I have the car in New York. Well, that was fine. But the problem is, I was living on West 23rd Street. So that's 7th Avenue, the 7th Avenue Express. Columbia was very conveniently up at 110th Street. That was fine. And I did go to a couple of lectures, at Columbia. But most of the time I spent going up and down the 7th Avenue Express, moving my car from side to side. Because in New York, on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, you can only have the car one side of the street, and Thursdays and Fridays, you can only have the car the other side of the street. So my economics didn't go very well. I was mainly involved with moving the car. And it wasn't until I got back to Oxford, not a million miles from here. In fact, I drove past the building a couple of hours ago, 9 Parks Road. Now, we're just off South Parks Road here. Well, 9 Parks Road, in my day, and I'm talking now about 1964, when I returned to Oxford to do serious work in agricultural economics, 9 Parks Road was a wonderful little place called the Oxford Institute for Agricultural Economics with an absolutely brilliant director called Colin Clark. And it was really thanks to the work I did then, thinking about international development and environment problems. And I say both things deliberately because development and environment are absolutely inextricably linked, that I was able to get a job at the World Bank. And that was a serious job. I mean, I was lucky. I mean, the World Bank, I've got to tell you, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, the World Bank remains, as far as development agencies are concerned, the most important agency in the world because it has the money, it has the power, it has the clout. The only thing to be sure of is you need to be sure it does the right thing. Because when you've got an organization with money, power, clout, and it does the wrong thing, then you're in real trouble. You see, now the UN on the whole doesn't have any money or power or clout, and it quite often does the wrong thing, but it doesn't make too much difference when the UN does the wrong thing because it's not that powerful. But when the World Bank decides it's going to fund some mega dam, which is going to change the whole course of the Mekong, then that really matters. Anyway, so I go off to America. And I'm lucky enough to work, for 2 years as what's known as a young professional. And I became increasingly interested in the whole environmental issue when I was in the World Bank. And after a year or two in the World Bank, a gentleman called John D. Rockefeller III. Now, the reason he was called John D. Rockefeller III was there'd been a John D. Rockefeller I and a John D. Rockefeller II. And that's the point. They didn't call him the John D. Rockefeller III just for the fun of it. And his grandfather was the old man who founded Standard Oil. And I worked for him, John D. Rockefeller III, as his aide on environmental and demographic issues. And we lived in New York. Actually, I lived in Norwalk, Connecticut. I used to take the New Haven line each morning to New York. And this was absolutely superbly interesting. And at the end of 1969, the middle of 1969, we produced a report which said the United Nations has to do something about the world population problem. You remember I mentioned that I a decade earlier, been pretty interested in the world population issue when I was sitting in the armchair in Exeter College, Oxford's junior common room. Well, here I was finally able to write a report which said the UN has to set up a world population agency, and it has to help women's rights, it has to help female employment, it has to help maternal and child health, and it also has to help with birth control. You know, and that was it. I mean, and this was a crucial moment when, I'm talking now at the end of the reign of John Paul the 23rd, when it looked as though the Roman Catholic Church might begin to soften its attitude as far as various forms of contraception were concerned. And I did a massive mission. I went around 18 different countries which were, as it were, toying with birth control and family planning programs, including, I remember, going to the Philippines. So the Philippines, an archly Catholic country, but there was a cardinal there, and odd enough, he was called Cardinal Sin. It's a true story. His name was Cardinal Sin. And he was at daggers drawn with another lady who was running the Philippines family planning program, and her name was Misconception. It's a true story. This is absolutely true, completely true. But we made progress. We made complete progress, and and the UN within, I tell you, well, what happened was we published the report. John D. Rockefeller III and I were invited down to Nixon, by the way, was still the president. He didn't, if you remember, Nixon stayed president until 1974. So in 1969, Nixon is president. His Secretary of State is William Rogers, and Rockefeller and I go down to present the report in the State Department building in C Street. We take a taxi from the National Airport. The taxi gets to the State Department, and Rockefeller starts patting his pockets, saying, "God, anybody got some money for the cab?" So I, paid for the cab. I can tell you, I remember that. You can be the richest man in the world, and the reason you can stay the richest man in the world, you get someone else to pay for the cab. Anyway, we went to see William Rogers, and William Rogers said, "We are getting behind this." Nixon, forgive me if I say some good words about President Nixon, William, and from my point of view, he was a brilliant man in the sense that he set up the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. He got through the US Environmental Protection Act, and he absolutely pushed on this whole question of population. And within 1 year of UN Population Fund being established, we had $200 million to spend. And in 1969, that was decent money. Okay, I'm going to cut this short because I want to have time to show some of the pics. I'm trying to explain why I became an environmentalist. Okay, that was mainly work on the whole demographic world population issue, and that agency is still going strong. It's been slightly sidelined by the emphasis and population becoming, an extremely political issue. And so I was lucky enough to come back from America in 1969 in the run-up to the 1970 election. Now, there are people here who will remember the 1970 election, and what is remarkable about the June 1970 election was that the Conservatives won with Mr. Edward Heath, and he was determined to take Britain into the EU. Poor old Heath, he's had a very, very bad press, for a very long time, but nevertheless, he was the man who determined to take Britain into the EU. From my own personal point of view, he said to me, would I join his staff in something called the Conservative Research Department as the environmental officer. So I was lucky enough to be, in the run-up to the June 1970 election, the environmental officer saying the Tories have got to do something more about the environment, just at the same time as we were going into Europe. And I'm compressing the story here. In 1973, January 1st, 1973, Britain joined the EU. When I say Britain, I mean the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, there may come a time when we're going to have to disaggregate this. And we may have to say, well, what is going to be the remaining bit of Britain? And Scotland obviously wants to stay in the EU. Northern Ireland will probably have to stay in the EU. Wales at the moment looks as though it's ready to stick with Britain as it comes out. So it may be that the United Kingdom is going to be the United Kingdom of England and Wales, for future reference. Anyway, I was very lucky in 1973. Britain joins enthusiastically, and at the same time, the EU decides to have an environmental policy. And the argument being that if you do have a single market, whether you've got free trade in goods and a number of services, and you're trying to equalize the conditions of competition, the argument is you've got to have some common rules. And by the way, this argument plays out today. Why on earth should we continue to be allowed to trade with Europe if we're not going to accept the common European standards? And that's just not the standard of how much arsenic there is in a glass of water. Which, by the way, there are some EU rules on how much arsenic. I wrote them, I can tell you, it is 0.004 milligrams. That's the maximum permitted amount of arsenic in water. Now, but the point is not just the product standards, it's the process standards too. Why on earth, for example, would the Germans accept products which we have manufactured where we have not, as it were, respected decent living standards, decent working standards for the workers? Why should they do that? Or decent environmental standards, emission standards. So it's, to my mind, completely fanciful to suppose that we can stay attached to the EU, but in some way not actually part of it. Anyway, this will play out, and I'm not here to talk about that. What I am here to say is that for 20 years, I'm talking about more than 20 years, really, because from 1973 to 1990, is that more than 20 years? No, it's less, isn't it? Fewer than 20 years. 17 years. Yeah, okay. Well, I went on until about 1994 in the EU, so let's call it 20 years. I was at the heart of the EU legislation, writing air pollution, water pollution, chemical waste, noise. Above all, I was very much involved in the whole nature protection directives. And the upshot of all that was that the EU, for my mind, was able to play a pretty major role in many of the major international environmental issues. Biodiversity, climate change, air pollution, water pollution, waste. You name it, I would argue that the EU has actually played a leading role. Now, I'm not saying that Britain didn't make a major contribution in that. Of course it did. A lot of intellectual force came in. It was those were the golden days. You didn't meet people saying, oh, but what about the loss of sovereignty? What about bureaucratic interference? Oh, I tell you, even in places like Oxford, you can meet people who say, well, what about sovereignty? Sovereignty. Every nation in the world gives up its sovereignty when it signs up to an international agreement. Anyway, to cut a long story short, one of the advantages of the role I had as head of the EU's Prevention of Pollution and Nuisances Division was I was not able to drive through environmental policy at EU level, and we went from being 9 countries, because Britain came in 1973 with Ireland and Denmark, and then Greece and Spain and Portugal joined, and then we went to 21, then we went to 27, and now we're 28. The EU also was able, because you are a solid bloc, able to influence international environmental policy. And that, of course, was a wonderful, wonderful position to be in. Now, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do this quite quickly. I'm going to go through some of the major highlights of international environmental policy, and I've been involved in most of the episodes I'm going to show. If there's time, I'm going to go through some more fun wildlife slides and end up with a bit about Australia. So, Greg, will you get me going on the UNEP plus 40? Yeah, that's brilliant. So okay, well, I mentioned UNEP. UNEP is the United Nations Environment Programme, and that was set up after the first World Environment Conference in 1972, which I had the honour to attend would you believe it, as the correspondent of the New Statesman. And UNEP, okay, it's not the World Bank, but it had an intellectual impact. And I'm going to just show you some of the highlights now. So as I say, in this book, the UNEP, the first 40 years, I actually published this book in 2012, so it's 3 years old now, 4 years old. Actually, more. Maths, no, maths. More, that's it. Okay. Now, what is it? This is Stockholm. This is Stockholm taken in 1972, that wonderful Stockholm in June, summer night, and there we were marching through the streets saying we're going to have a World Environment Agency and a World Environment Programme, and we're going to save the whale, and that rapidly led to the setting up of the UN Environment Programme, and that man there, the homunculus, is as with a symbol of UNEP. Can I point with this one? Is there a pointer? Is there a point to it? Oh, this one. Okay. Is that light shining? Oh, there. That gentleman is Maurice Strong. Don't forget about Maurice Strong. He was the first chairman of the first World Environment Conference, and he's only just died, and he was also the chairman 20 years later when we came to Rio. And this is how Nairobi looked. The UNEP, United Nations Environment, was set up in Nairobi, and that, of course, is the Nairobi National Park. And that building, that one there, was the first place UNEP was established. Later on, it went off to the suburbs at Gigiri. You can probably still see leopards. Or is that a cheetah? I ought to know. If anybody ought to know, I ought to know. Anyway. This is what the building looks like now. This is where UNEP is now in Nairobi. That is the Palais des Nations. Some of the work does get done in the United Nations in Geneva. So that's the Palais des Nations in Geneva. This is a body. This is called the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. The point about it, the UN does work, as the EU works, through legal instruments wherever it can. And in 1973, it worked up a treaty called the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, and that is the convention which, for example, regulates the trade in ivory and in rhino horn and stuff like that. And now Kenyatta, that's a picture of Jomo Kenyatta attending a UNEP Governing Council meeting. I used to go down as the representative and go to these meetings, and they were important. I tell you, it was inspiring. There he is again, Kenyatta, and behind him is, Morris. Oh God. No, I'm trying to get back to the one I was just. Well, it's gone. No, what's happened? I pressed the wrong button, you see. There we are. No. Oh, well. It was a jolly good try. I don't mean, what's my passing? Okay, good, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, what I was trying to do was just to show you. Yeah, that's it. I wanted to show you. I don't want to do that thing of getting it on. There, that's him. And there's Jomo Kenyatta, and there's Maurice Strong. And Maurice Strong was the first director of UNEP. And Kenyatta gave him a lot of support. We also worked out that you have some issues you have to deal with regional agreements. You want to get the countries involved and to sign, there was a regional seas program, and for example, there are international pollution agreements on the Baltic Sea, the Mediterranean, and that was all coordinated from. That gives you an idea of the different parts of the world. That was all coordinated from Nairobi. That includes Antarctica. Global warming was an issue which came to the fore already. You see, by 1984, 85, I went to the first meeting of the committee which was set up. And here you see some of the heroes of our time. Don't forget about some of these people. I'm going to... That man was the man who succeeded Maurice Strong. He's called Mustafa Tolba. This man was, until very recently, the president of something called the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is an Englishman called Watson. And this was a Swedish scientist called Bert Bolin, who was absolutely fundamental in saying, look, there really is a major world issue, which is climate change, and the world's got to do something about it. Well, this was in 1986, and you could say, well, 30 years later, have we really done it? Okay, we had the Paris Convention in 2015. Toxic waste. We had some world agreements on toxic waste. This is called the Basel Convention, which led to... There was a time when ships were traveling around the world and dumping toxic waste everywhere. I'm not saying everything is good. Biodiversity, turtle. I spent a lot of time on turtles, or with turtles. And these are the 7 species of marine turtle, and they're all endangered. Whales, flamingos. Okay, in 1992, 20 years after the Stockholm Conference, we come back to another world meeting, and this time it's in Rio, and that's the reason I've put this picture of it's called the sugar loaf, the pont de sucre. And there it was. It's called the United Nations Conference on Environmental Development. See, by 1992, people were beginning to say, okay, although we're talking about environment, we must talk about environment and development. We mustn't think that environment stops people developing. Actually, it does. Truth of the matter is that you've got to get the thing under control. But by then we'd had a report called the Brundtland Report on Sustainable Development. So we all come back to Rio in 1992, and we adopt. I draw it to you. One of my books is actually called The Earth Summit of 1992. I happily was, for 10 years, the international editor of Kluwer Law and Environment series. And one of the perks of being international editor, every time I wrote a book, I could put it into the series. Without anybody saying, has this been peer reviewed? Anyway, so happily my book on that, there's a 650-page book, and it costs $128, I can tell you, and it's called the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. I'm going through this quickly. We tried to do something about deserts internationally, but that has not really worked. This is another great man. This is Tolba. I'm sorry, not Tolba, Tupfer. It's the German foreign minister called Tupfer. He became environment secretary, and he is talking to a wonderful Kenyan lady called Wangari Maathai, who set up a movement called Green Shoots or something like that, and that's the bridge. I don't know why I put that in. It's the bridge between Sweden and Denmark, I think. Yeah. Okay, the life moves on, and we get to 2015 when we have something called Sustainable Development Goals. And they too have some, major environmental challenges. I went to this meeting as well. One of the things I've been lucky enough over the years to do, and it's part of the reason they asked me to write this book, is I've actually been to all these meetings in one form or another. Now this is the then president of South Africa called Thabo Mbeki. And he did a good job too. And though, look at that. That is Nelson Mandela. And what's the name of the rugby player? Pienaar, is that right? Yeah, that's it. Well, that was a great moment for South Africa. Okay, this was the extraordinary hurricane, the tsunami, and so on. This was the last director of UNEP, but one, a German Brazilian called Achim Steiner, who's now gone off to the United Nations Development Program, and that's his book called The Green Economy. Now, that more or less has done that series of picks. I'm just going through it quickly. That's the end of that conference, and those are the 4 of the 5 directors. Maurice Strong wasn't able to come to that party. But there they all are, and that's the last page of my book, and that's how to buy it. Actually, no, you don't have to buy it. You can download it for free. I mean, you know, if you go to your ordinary website and you put in UNET plus 40, you will get it 600 pages, all the pics free. Now, can I move on to the next one very quickly? Because I just want to liven things up a bit, because this made it all seem very serious. And it is indeed a very serious business. But I do want to say that in the kind of job I've done over 40 years, I've had a wonderful chance to be almost everywhere, to go almost everywhere. And quite often I've just revisited places. And this is a book I wrote called Where the Wild Things Were, Travels of a Conservationist. And I'm going to rattle through these, because I know, because basically Helena and I want to sit down and talk as well. So I'm going to take about 10 minutes to go through these and maybe some of the other ones. But this will just give you some of the impressions of what it is. Okay, there we are. I'm the chairman of the president of the gorilla organization, and we're trying to save gorillas. And this is in the Congo. This is in a park called the Kahuzi-Biega National Park. And by the way, you would have read the other day of some people being captured in the Congo and happily released. And this is a wonderful gorilla who charged out. The name is given as Chimanuka. But yeah, they're quite frightening. Unfortunately, I had a pygmy tracker with me, and I was able to pick up the pygmy tracker and sort of hold the man, to stop the. I interposed the tracker. That's what I did. Anyway, and there he is. Okay, then because you have to raise money when you're chairman of things, and so I tried to raise some money by climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. I climbed in some style. I had 8 chaps, to help me get to the top. Now, where are the 8? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, the 8th is probably taking the photo. That is it. That's yeah. Don't think we had a selfie. That's right. Anyway, that's it. And we get to Gilman's Point. Well, that, by the way, you can translate 5,681 meters, and I think AMSL means above mean sea level. That is jolly nearly 19,500 feet, I think. And we did raise £25,000 on that occasion. That's coming down quickly. This is Antarctica. This is a seal. It's not. It is a leopard seal. Yes, a leopard seal. And I put these in because I'm actually rather proud of these. Leopard seal's got an eye on that penguin. Do you see that? And basically, and then it gets the penguin. But actually, I'm not much of a cameraman, but on this particular occasion, I thought that's okay. But the pluses of this kind of job is you get to see things which are absolutely wonderful. Blue whales. You think the only place you see blue whales in the National History Museum in London. You can see 100 blue whales in the Gulf of California, the Sea of Cortez, and there's another place off Ceylon where you can see them. And I tell you, to see spouting blue whales one afternoon, that's a blue whale fluking. And that is not a blue whale, that is a grey whale. The grey whales you get off the coast of Baja, California. They come down, and that was a big political issue. The Mexicans wanted to build a salt mine, and we managed to get that stopped. Partly because this is the moral of the story here. We got some big film stars like Leonardo DiCaprio and others, and they came down and says, look, that's me. That's as close as well as I've been recently, and I'm actually touching the nose of that grey whale. This is another big issue, and another reason for being worried about Brexit. Okay, the Malaysians say if Britain's out, we'll make sure that we can sell our palm oil to Britain. The palm oil is resulting in the complete deforestation of Malaysia and Indonesia and so on. And there I am, tracking down. Look at this. And you fly over Indonesia, all you see these palm oil trees, and it's complete destruction of the forest. And of course, we're buying the palm oil like mad. And look at that as a kind of symbolic vision. The forest burning, the palm oil tanker taking the. And what happens? The poor orangutans are left totally stranded. They're in the. That's me. I'm rather too close to that lady. She was called Sisri or something like that. And once she put her arm round, and they are very strong, orangutans. This is not so much an environment, it's more of an animal welfare issue, and I haven't got time to talk about it, but the animal welfare issue does. I used to work in Cape Cod with a wonderful organisation called the International Fund for Animal Welfare, and it does really try and improve animal welfare standards. And these are wild horses in the Philippines where it's all illegal, where they fight each other. You see, they fight each other and they bet. This is of course photo you've seen so often. This is the Serengeti ballooning over the Serengeti. We had a crash. It was a crash landing. That's me. In a pink jacket. What happened to that pink jacket? Good point. You ever see photographs? You say to yourself, whatever happened to that jacket? Well, we survived, and we had a breakfast. And the fellow, actually, the Israeli pilot, I want to go on. The Israeli pilot, that gentleman there, he said actually he'd only had to crash land the balloon once in about 30 years of flying over the Serengeti. He said the last time he did it, he had to scoop up a python and a wildebeest, or a rotting carcass of a wildebeest. Now, talking about wildebeest, there's the zebras crossing, and I'm very pleased with these photos. That's in the Mara, and there's the crocodile trying to get the. Now the point is, it's a sacrificial zebra. If they don't, if they don't get one, the others won't cross. So that's what I call the elephant in the room. And my wife was with me on this occasion, and we were told that we with this bedroom which we're in, which was in a place called Madikwe, previously known as Bofutatswana, and they said the last person to occupy this room was Michelle Obama. Look at that. So I was very pleased about that. Whether she saw the elephant, I do not know. Now here we are, quick as a flash. That's iguanas. These are just, the joy of going to the Galapagos. I've been a couple of times. I'm going again next year. Waved albatross. That's the islands of the Galapagos. Okay, three stingrays, manta rays, and look at the next photo. I hope it's the next photo. Look at that. I tell you, this has been taken with the box brownie. These tortoises are still there. Look at that. That one. And then this is the last side of that. No, okay, now I'm going to go extremely quickly through just to give you a fun. This is what I was doing last week. So I want the Gawler Range ones. And then we'll call it a day on that. Okay. Yeah, I'll just do this very quickly. I was lucky enough to go to Australia last week. I had to talk about this book of mine at the Sydney Writers' Festival called Compromat, but I got some wildlife stuff in. And Australia is a most wonderful place, for wildlife. And so there we are in the bush. And this is the lake where they do the world land speed record, and it now stands at 348 miles per hour, achieved last month by an American lady called Arabella Thompson, and it's on that very stretch. This I've put in because this is an Australian sea lion, and I am swimming with this Australian sea lion. In fact, it bit me on the arm moments later. I haven't put in the slide with the bite. Look at that, though. Just look at this. You see, these are the pluses. These are the pluses. Look at that. Well, you can't not have a kangaroo if you're in Australia. Look, and you see the reflection of the kangaroo, isn't it? Oh, look at that. There we are landing on that lake. That could be the... Oh, and the starry, starry night. Well, there we go. Helena.
Lovely.
There he is.
Wonderful.
Pleasure.
Stanley. I assume. Not the first person who said that to you. I think one of your books is called...
It is Stanley, I presume, is the first one.
Yes.
Stanley, I resume.
The later one. Is that my microphone? Thank you so much, Greg. Good. Thank you. Now everyone can hear me. You've had an extraordinary career, and you're still doing extraordinary and fun things because you take life by the throat, and you really do feel passionately and love the things that you do. I just wanted to make to pick up on a number of things. You started off becoming interested in the whole business of population, and that has continued. Population. You started off by saying that we were expecting there to be sort of, I can't remember, by 250 and 50, and we're certainly on track for that. And
And it links to the environment because, of course, the more you deplete the world's resources, the more you have people everywhere, the more they're likely to be the difficulty in dealing with the sort of byproducts of life, which are all that stuff that we create and throw away and so on, and it pollutes our rivers and our waters, and the plastic and the poisoning of animals and the destruction of fish and all of that stuff and the toxic stuff that comes out of it. The business of population is vital to the business of the environment, and the whole business of the environment is important, and people are important to climate change, and so the whole thing knits together into a kind of seamless web of depression in that it doesn't look good for us.
The sadness is that population has got off the front burner as far as international politics is concerned.
People don't talk about it anymore.
People are terrified they're going to be called racist if they say, look, the black and the yellow and the brown races are actually multiplying much faster than the white races. They're terrified that they'll be called racist if they say that. That's A. B, they're terrified that men are going to start telling women what to do with quote-unquote
Their bodies.
Their bodies. All of that's true, of course.
Uh-huh.
So the net result has been that what were some really effective movements, birth control movements, have been pretty much stopped in their track. When I first went to India, for example, the vasectomy program really did work.
But what we do know also about that is that the more you educate women, the more they do actually take control of their choices they make about. And
that is fine. And of course, the emphasis now, and
yeah.
we are now saying more and more emphasis on female education. Perfectly true that does. But the point is, unless you put in the programs as well, the maternal and child health care.
We would wait a long time for the education to go on through. But after creating that link and recognizing the link with the environment and the natural world and the way in which we're destroying so many of the things that actually are so important to life on this earth, it gets back to the business that we have elevated money and the making of money and the making of stuff for folk to buy and that whole kind of economic cycle of things into, it's very hard to talk about it. You mentioned the difficulty of talking about the environment and development and that it was environment and development, because if you talked up environmental protection too much, people saw it as limiting and inhibiting the advancement of societies and holding them back. And people saying, we want to be developing the same way that the West has. And in the same way, as soon as you start talking about climate change, the oil companies are not going to buy into it, and many of the kind of vested interests that make money are not rather keen on the idea of what you have to do to prevent climate change.
You pick up the key issues. Now, unfortunately, in many of our so-called democracies, political movements are created, or political action is purchased by money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to say that if you take the climate change issue, even in this country, there are industries which are still probably lobbying.
To say that, yes.
And in America, it is certainly the case that important congressmen, have major political contributions from companies. So that's one thing.
I mean, the whole thing about climate change denial is kind of extraordinary. It's almost become impossible now to deny it, because there isn't a sort of decent scientist in the world who maintains that climate change isn't caused by human activity, and that that we're depleting the atmosphere, and it's the way that we live that's part of that. But it still does amaze me that I listen to politicians standing up in Parliament. Certainly in the House of Lords, we have Nigel Lawson still getting up and still denying that it's and insisting that it's part of the great cycles of life, that there are periods that are cold and there are periods, and not wanting to admit that. And for a long time we've insisted that it must be about their own vested interests, and that they've been persuaded of this because it's what they want to believe. But it does seem to me that the intellectual argument's been won. What hasn't been won is that the urgency of our all changing our lives in order to make the change.
The intellectual argument has been won, but the political argument
has not been won.
I've Australia is still, you fly up the coast, past Newcastle, the tankers laden with coal going off to China. And basically Australia has built its economy on, as it were, the extractive industries.
One of the things that comes out of your experiences is, and it's the thing that made you sort of have that momentary diversion into the business of Europe, which I am very happy to have you divert into, but is that Europe has played a rather important role in the world, actually, in talking up these issues and in helping to develop many of the standards around environmental protection, around protection of wildlife and our natural life, cleaning up the seas around Britain, for example, because they did it around the whole of Europe.
We had a single marine protected area around Britain. We hadn't had the habitats directly. We hadn't declared any marine. And now, of course,
And you were very active in all of that.
Just to pick up on this, okay, the other night I was talking to Michael Gove. Michael Gove was saying, okay, we know we're going to lose all the EU.
I'm not going to say a word about him stabbing your son in the back, but anyway, I'm glad that you're still nice to him.
Michael Gove is saying, yes, but we can have a better, cleaner Britain. And yet at the same time, we know that Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, is going to make it absolutely clear that this institute, which Michael Gove says he wants to set up, as it were, substitute for the sanctioning powers the Commission has and the ECJ, the teeth.
Yes.
Because we had a wonderful story where the UK government was found guilty 3 times running by our Supreme Court for not enforcing EU air pollution
That's right.
laws. Okay, well, all that is going to go in a Brexit situation. Globe is saying, no, but my new institute.
We'll keep those standards high.
Yes, but in fact, when you get down to it, you realise that this new institute is going to be toothless from the word go. Now, the House of Lords the other night, and you particularly did actually pass its 15th amendment, saying no is no good. Gove has to do better. You have to have some body which will really substitute, because the important thing about the whole EU side of things is you have real teeth in enforcement. You can, give you an example. I have been to a forest in Poland. The most amazing forest you've ever imagined. It's called Białowieża. It's on the border of Poland and Ukraine. And in that forest, it is one of the only old-growth forests still surviving in Europe. There's about thousands of years, and it also has bison in it. And the
Golly.
Polish bison.
Bison, European bison, I didn't know. Who knew?
The government has been logging that forest, or allowing logging. And the European Court of Justice has said, no, you can't do it. Now, I can just see our politicians saying, we can't have the European Court of Justice saying we can't do something. Well, for heaven's sake, if the European Court of Justice wasn't there, these things would happen. And this is what we're all going to lose, you see, in this Brexit situation. That's why this question of can we create countervailing institutions is so important. And I hope the government doesn't overrule you on
That,
on 15.
yeah. It is interesting, that thing where you're one of the few Conservative politicians I've heard talking about the fact that sovereignty, to elevate sovereignty to this absolute is sheer nonsense. Because once you're involved in collaborating around international treaties, you're of course.
We've ceded sovereignty in human rights.
Of course. And if you don't have some external body to say that you're transgressing, then you're never, because if you're marking your own homework, you're not likely to do it. And so you need to have these bodies, and we know it all in everything. We know it just now where we're looking at all manner of things where institutions have failed. For example, the churches in relation to sexual abuse. If you don't have external bodies able to deal with these things, to which these things have to be referred, but you actually do it internally, then you never see justice.
Well, you raise a really good question, and this is exactly the right place to raise it. It's gone a bit quiet, but well of time when Mrs. May was saying that she also wanted to pull us out of
European Convention on Human Rights, yeah.
And she'd gone a bit quiet about that.
Well, it's been put on to the back burner because we absolutely, and some of our judges are saying, well, at least we've got that backstop that the European Convention on Human Rights is going to remain. But the problem is we don't know what the longer term ambition is with regard to the European Convention on Human Rights. But, I mean, having external bodies is often very important. And on this environmental issue, you were just pointing out the ways in which the European Court of Justice has actually been rather important on maintaining those standards. So I want to invite in my audience, a number of who I know are people who are interested and concerned with human rights matters. Who would like to, with environmental matters, who would like to come in? Do I see a hand? Yes.
Could you say a few words about the European Trade Permit Scheme, whether you think it's been successful or not? Because I'm under the impression that it's been deeply disappointing.
Well, the problem about this is a system whereby industries were allocated emission possibilities. And what went wrong is that...
So explain that to us. Industry was would you want to explain it?
Well, basically, that in 2005, you had to sort of buy permits.
Why don't you take the microphone?
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, so from 2005, basically the European Union set emissions targets, and firms had to pay to buy sort of permits to pollute effectively. But over the last, 13 years, there have been so many changes to these policies that many people...
What happened was they were allocated.
Yeah.
They were given rather over-generous allocation right at the beginning.
Yeah.
In order to try and slowly but
the idea
surely
was each year
drive it
the
down.
allocation gets less and less and less, but in fact they so overrated at the beginning
Yeah.
that it didn't have the
I think pollution was meant to come down by about 20% by 2020 or something, wasn't it?
And it hasn't achieved that.
That needed to be rejigged. And will be rejigged as we try to meet the targets set by the climate, the Paris climate.
But often that happens, which is that people are over-generous in the beginning because they don't want to frighten the horses, and then they want to draw them in, and then they kind of fire it up.
Right.
Who would like to ask another question with regard to some of these issues, either in relation to wildlife and protection of wildlife, or in relation to... Yes, there's a hand there, please.
You mentioned that the...
Wait until the microphone comes so that... Yeah. It's people at the back can't hear. We can hear, but...
We can't hear
Stanley?
very well.
Stanley, oh, maybe your thing's not switched on. Is the thing in your pocket working? Have you see if it's switched on? But that one was working, so you were fine when you were up there. It's just you've been a little bit quieter here. So,
Thank you.
thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so I had a question about the sort of the mitigation of desert problems that you mentioned, but you said
No, you'll have to speak up a bit, sorry.
You mentioned about the sort of the mitigating desert issues and problems in one of the photos, but you went through it very quickly, but you mentioned that it failed. Could you expand on that?
The
if
mitigation
possible?
of...
Desert issues. There was a photo of
Yeah,
the camels.
basically in 1992, in amongst the other package, basically the Rio Conference of 1992 adopted something called Agenda 21. It adopted the Convention on Biological Diversity, and it adopted the Climate Change Convention. And it also said it would finalize something called the Desert Convention. And that I've got to tell you, never has really taken shape. And the idea was that you were going to help desert countries, to deal with the problems of desertification. It was a very big issue.
The absence of water, and the place is becoming more and more a desert.
Yes.
Central Africa has got a serious issue around all of this, and people then moving from places which are becoming deserts in order to pursue land that's more arable, and as a result, the greater migration of people, and it's worth.
And a huge political implication, of course, as well,
Leading
because
to
if you actually look
refugees.
at the potential reservoir of migrants into
Yeah.
Europe, many hundreds of millions of them are coming from those desert regions.
I wanted to ask you about this, was that it was interesting to me that, for example, the dates on your photographs showed that things like the pollution of the Mediterranean and people throwing things into the sea, and that you showed a beach in which there was all manner of rubbish on beaches and the pollution of beaches. And as early as 1972, that serious work was being done on that. And when you first went into Europe, and that we're still seeing the problems around all of that, with places in the world which are so full of rubbish being thrown into the sea by peoples, and then the business of climate change coming up so much earlier than I thought it had, as an issue, that we were becoming alert to climate change, and yet have done so little about it in the 27,
You're right, that first meeting
20,
which I went to
years.
on climate change was in 1986 in Geneva. Well, that's some
30 years.
30 years. On the plastics, okay, the marine plastics. Yes,
Marine
you could say
plastics.
thanks to Blue Planet too, where there's been
We're now talking about it.
more effort. I do look back actually at the 69, 70 as pretty much one of the highlights of the environmental movement. If you remember, the first spaceship Earth shots were about 68, I think, and the first lunar landing was, I think, July 69. So we were beginning to have this sense of spaceship Earth and so on. And at exactly that time, you had these totally brilliant people like Paul Ehrlich writing it. By the way, he's still alive, working in California, writing his book, Population, Resources, Environment. You had the Club of Rome producing a really, really important document. I'm sure it's in the Bodleian Library, called, the Club of Rome report. It was called the Club of Rome report. Limits of growth. Sorry.
Limits of growth. Yeah.
Limits of growth. And then in our own country, we had Teddy Goldsmith. Teddy Goldsmith was Jimmy Goldsmith's brother, and he was a good friend of mine. And he wrote a very, very important document called Blueprint for Survival. So those, if you like, were the highlights, the high points of the environmental movement. I say to myself, are we going to recreate? And I suspect not, because there's far too many countervailing political influences now. I mean,
Not least, I mean, the whole kind of insistence on growth. I mean, you're talking about the limits of growth. I mean, and there was someone writing on it all those years back. And there's now a debate beginning to take place on, is growth the only way? I mean, or is this business of insisting upon the continuation of economic growth as being our great aspiration, is that in itself something that is absolutely inimical to...
Well, that's why I come back to population. Basically, GDP is what it is, gross domestic product. What the figure that matters is per capita GDP, the gross domestic product, per person. And it's perfectly obvious to me that in a situation of expanding populations, if you want people to have the same or increasing income, then of course you've got to have increasing GDP. But if you could only manage to stabilize your population, or better still, actually reduce the size of your population, then people can continue to get richer and richer, because the cake is being divided among a smaller number of people. It seems to be just elementary maths, but it is so difficult to get this point across.
There's a hand there.
Excuse me, I think you're missing a fundamental point, Mr. Johnson. Surely the question is less about population and it's more about consumption.
Well, I don't disagree with you.
If everyone wants to drive a Ferrari and fly first class all over the world, of course the world doesn't have enough resources. But if we're prepared to trim our consumption a little bit, then the poorest parts of the world can still enjoy an improved standard of living.
I don't disagree with you at all. Of course, consumption is absolutely crucial.
But sir,
but
you just
I'm
said
saying
if
that
everyone wants to continue to get richer. You said if everyone wants to continue to get richer, and that's the problem.
Well, poorer people always want to be better off than they are.
Yes, they
I
do.
mean, that's not going to be surprising. The problem about holding up the West and the lifestyle of the West as being something to aspire to is problematic. I mean, why shouldn't poor people say, well, why tell us about not consuming anymore, and that we should be watching about creating...
I'm not saying they shouldn't consume more. I'm saying the level of consumption.
It's a level of consumption,
If you
particularly
look
by
at
the
if
rich
you look at-
world.
If you look at the consumption of the planet's resources, 10% of the world's population consumes something like 90%. And I'm saying that that is what needs rebalancing.
Yeah.
Well, if you go back to Paul Ehrlich produced an equation in there which was impact equals population times consumption times technology, or something like that. And that, P is always in there. But of course, you're absolutely right about technology and consumption.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree with you more. The only thing I do is go around on a bicycle whenever I can. It's pathetic. You know, my little gesture to a sustainable lifestyle is to go on a bike, increasingly short
Keep doing
distances.
it. We do a lot of that in Oxford. There's a hand up there. Please. Lean over the thing.
And do try to speak into the microphone.
Hello, I'll sit down. I went to a talk in Oxford a couple of weeks ago. The talk got aired on YouTube, and it was Climate Change, Past, Present and Future. And they had, can't remember his name, a guy who was a sort of an expert, travels all around the world on climate change. And he basically said he was agreeing with this guy down here about our consumption. And he was basically saying that we as humans have a metabolism, and so does the Earth. And as our metabolism increases, in other words, the more energy we burn, you know, I mean, when we were sort of cave dwellers, we would light a fire and that was about it. But now we have cars and second homes and all these sort of things. So he's basically trying to say that as our metabolism grows globally, then the Earth's metabolism suffers. So the soil becomes less able to grow food, the sea becomes less able to sustain fish and sort of aquatic life. And what he was basically trying to say was this sort of grew very, very slowly until the year 2000. And then he said at the point we hit the year 2000, we started to spike. So something's happened globally, which basically means that our metabolism is growing at a rapid rate from the year 2000, and it's unsustainable, and it's to do with the economy. So the economy of growth, basically saying it just will not work, and our tipping point is becoming very, very close. So this isn't a gradual increase, this is something that's happened very, very recently. I think he was basically saying the population's sort of almost irrelevant, because if we continue to burn fossil fuels and sort of contaminate the land, we're going to be extinguished way before we hit these targets of population.
Well, my point on that one would be, I don't think the extinction of the human race is particularly important. You know, we weren't here for many billions of years, and we won't be here for many billions of years. But on the way, an awful lot of other things are going to go, and and the impact on wildlife, for example, we've lost a lot of the wildlife in this country, but there are parts of the world where the impact of spreading populations and affluent populations on the remaining wildlife is just, I mean, I showed some pictures of Indonesia, of Kalimantan. Well, that is an absolute classic example where our patterns of consumption, particularly our consumption of palm oil, has led to a direct impact on the wildlife of those forests. No, everything you say is absolutely right, but I don't think there's any. There are some things which can be done, but you don't find politicians out there saying, well, maybe the Green politician, maybe Caroline Lucas does, but I'm sure there are different models.
I think she does, actually. I think that she. But it's
Jenny Jones, maybe.
Yes, but it is interesting. People shy away from this because they know that telling people to change their lives is one of the hardest things in the world to get people to do, especially if they're enjoying privilege. And so You know,
And yet it has worked on the plastic bottles, hasn't it? Oh, no, sorry, worked on the plastic bags, and the thought is it now may work on the plastic bottles. That's a little example where things do seem to change.
yeah. But I think we're having to talk about something much more radical even than
Of
that.
course we do. No,
Who else would like to come in? There's a hand up there, Stephen Blundell.
no, you're right.
You described how you became an environmentalist. What do you think is the most effective way of changing people's minds? Is it better to influence politicians who change policies, or is it better to influence individuals so that we all change our policy or put pressure on politicians?
Well, my experience has been that it's better to try and work inside the system. So I've always said if you can work at a political level, that is good. But in order to work effectively at a political level, you have to make sure that the public support is out there. So the best possible thing is when you have people inside government wanting to do things, whipping up, to use a silly word, you know, the kind of pressures which help get them through. And we actually are moving into, I've just been in Australia at a, as I told you, the Sydney Writers' Festival, and one of the people who was with me had written a book called New Power. Okay, now New Power, this concept is not just people voting for MPs. New Power is all the people who are filling these petitions online, like 38 million people, writing to say, stop fracking in X, Y, or Z.
Do they make any difference? Does it really
I don't know if it makes a difference. I mean, but I imagine the politicians are beginning to understand that they have to respond to pressure.
To some of this? Yeah, I wonder which ones they
It's a
respond
good question.
to and which they don't. But it is, how do you get that out? Who else would like to come in, please?
Going back to the consumption issue here, I think one of the saddest things that this country
No, you have to speak into your microphone.
that this country has got itself into is that I'm part of the generation whose parents came out of the ration time after the war. And one of the things I was taught was, let's see what we've got in the fridge and make something out of it. And something that absolutely disgusts me is that apparently we, on average, throw away 1/3 of the food that we buy. And yet, we are now deciding not to teach children about home economics. It's not an important thing, and we have the worst obesity rate in Europe. I think this is an absolute abhorrence. And if we can do something about plastic bags, why can we not do something about teaching children how to eat properly and how not to waste food? It's a disgrace. Wow. I've just spent 6 weeks in Malawi and seen the effects of overpopulation and near starvation in so many people, and it's just disgusting to come back and still be part of that obsessive, wasteful society.
I think that's I had 3 weeks before Christmas on 600 calories a day, and I rather welcomed that, actually. I found it rather invigorating. Because it made me realize that actually you can live on far
Less
much,
than we
much
do.
less than you think, and so
But there is this other thing, which is that in order to get people to buy more stuff, they have this business of sell-by dates,
Yes.
where things that can stay in your fridge or in your cupboard for very much longer have sell-by dates on them, dried goods and things, which are just ridiculous, and that's one of the problems. I saw a hand. I saw somebody. Yes, please, Anne Ellen.
Thanks. So we already touched a little bit on the role of the economy, and I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the role of corporate actors, businesses, in all of that.
Corporate actors.
Because
about the role of corporate actors.
Exactly. So because there's also so many debates on business and human rights, the UN guiding principles, and often it's not that linked to the environment. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that.
I regard business as the enemy. I always have. As a good Tory, I regard business as the enemy.
He's a rare and unique conservative in that.
Business. You would talk to a businessman. They say, "Sorry, we have a fiduciary." They love that word. Fiduciary duty to maximise the return to our shareholders. So it is jolly, jolly difficult to get businessmen to think beyond the bottom line. It really is. There are efforts made. The most business now have something called is it called corporate social responsibility or something else, CSR?
Yes, they're supposed to care about stakeholders and folk
Yes.
beyond their shareholders, yes.
But when it comes to it, you have these meetings. Okay, you have the meetings and you have these brilliant people who say, can we vote on it? And you get a vote, a show of hands. But then it turns out that the big life insurance companies have just voted their block vote, so
That's
so
right.
nothing, so nothing happens. Well, I think you could be right. I mean, basically, it has to be done at a political level, and we do not at the moment. Now, maybe Mr. Corbyn would be the answer.
Well,
Do you think?
all I would say is that I don't know whether Mr. Corbyn's the answer or not. All I would say, though, is that the business of corporate responsibility for some of these things, whether it's oil spillages which affect the environment in many different places, the whole business of fracking, all those kind of things of we're maximising profit and some of it absolutely detrimental to the environment and creating climate change and so on, is that at the moment we've started down a road of creating what's called soft law.
Yeah.
But I have absolute confidence that it's going to end up turning into hard law because it's going to be necessary to actually start taking action, legal action, against corporates that fail to commit to responsibilities which the state will have to set for them. And the difficulty of that, as we know, is because we see it with taxation, is that corporations are able to move their state relationship to somewhere else where they will not be prosecuted. But the idea that, for example, BP could be prosecuted for spilling oil and for neglectful, caretaking of the areas in which they're working is going to become an issue, and I think that we're going to see corporates being held to account in the way that hasn't happened in the past.
But that is why this European link was important, because we were moving into a situation where the EU was trying to get at the business of companies.
It's why I feel very, very strongly that the whole business of in a globalized world, that there should be economic blocks, because it sets standards, which Europe has done and has done it for the world, but it's also about the fact that you can work together to actually deal with this business of corporates and malfeasance by corporations. So
I agree, and the great fear in a Brexit situation is that we'll say, oh, we're free at last, let's scrap our corporation tax.
To the lowest common denominator and to not protect
of course, Ireland did, I'm addressing you as a lady from Ireland.
Yes.
Ireland did, go a long way down having a special regime for corporations and so on and so forth, up to the point where I think it got fined, for having too lax a regime.
Yeah. Anyway, is there anyone else who would like to come in and ask Stanley a question? There we are. Derek, please, would the microphone go up to the end of the third row?
Just a point about Ireland also, it has an electoral system that allows Green members of Parliament to be present in government, which this country doesn't. So
you mean it has a proportionate?
Yep.
Well, actually, you've just raised a very good point. Maybe what we are saying is that the way the first past the post system is structured in this country has made it difficult for people of
like
environmental persuasion actually to get into power, whereas in Holland and Germany and other countries which have had PR systems, the Greens have done much better, haven't they?
It is interesting that.
A good point.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that. I'm going off next weekend to Dublin, actually, to a meeting at UCL.
So it'd be interesting to explore, yes, University College.
UCD.
UCD, University College Dublin.
And I hadn't realised this point. You've got a PR system there, have you?
Yeah, there is a PR system. Okay, so is there anyone else who'd like to come in? Well, Stanley, that was very invigorating and wonderful.
Well, thank heavens you were here to answer the questions, Helen. What a relief. A, I couldn't hear them. I couldn't hear them. B, I couldn't answer them.
No, you were absolutely wonderful. And the photographs were utterly fabulous. And I wanted to swim with sea lions when I saw them. And everybody else did too, didn't you? Please join me in saying thank you to Stanley.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Helen, am I right in thinking that this is one of the last of these events in your